There is something strange about your inner world. The moment you look at a thought, it shifts. You watch an emotion, and suddenly it's not as loud as it was a second ago. It's almost like your attention has this quiet power, subtle, invisible, but unbelievably transformative. And honestly, this isn't just spiritual poetry. Even physics whispers the same thing. In quantum mechanics, a particle exists as pure possibility until someone observes it. The instant you look, the wave of potential collapses into a definite result. Almost like the universe itself leans in and says, "You're watching now? Then let me take shape for you." And without realizing it, you do the exact same thing inside your mind. Every time you turn inward, something rearranges. A thought dissolves as if embarrassed to be caught. A craving loosens its grip. A fear shrinks like a shadow touched by light. And you might wonder how something as passive as observing could have such an active impact. But here's where things begin to twist. The moment you start questioning why observing holds such power, another question sneaks in behind it. Who is doing the observing? And why does that observer feel so slippery, like you're trying to hold water in your hands? At first, creating an inner observer feels like progress. You take a step back from your reactions, and suddenly there's space. Space to breathe, space to notice, space to choose. You tell yourself things like, "I'm not the mind, I'm the one who watches the mind." And it brings relief, calm, a little clarity, almost like you found a quiet balcony above the chaos of your life. But if you're truly honest with yourself, and you have to be if you want to understand what's actually going on, something weird happens. The observer you think you found won't stay still. One moment it feels like it's behind your eyes. The next moment it's hovering in your chest. Sometimes it's outside the body altogether. The center of you keeps shifting, and deep down you realize you're watching the observer too. And that's when the cracks begin to show. Because if you can observe the observer, then the observer is not the final you. It's just another object in this vast field of awareness. Another thought wearing spiritual clothing. Another identity pretending to be the real thing. You didn't find the true observer, you found another mask. And this is where people usually start getting uncomfortable. Because the thing they were using as their refuge, the witness, the watcher, turns out to be no more solid than the thoughts they were trying to escape from. So the illusion begins right here, at the very first step of observing your mind. The idea that there's a stable, separate you behind the eyes, watching everything go by feels comforting. It feels safe. It feels spiritual. But when you chase it, when you actually turn toward it and ask, "Where are you observing from?" the ground dissolves under your feet. Every time you try to land on a location, some inner vantage point, you realize you're watching it from somewhere else. And that's the beginning of the unraveling, the beginning of seeing that the observer you believed in might not exist at all. Now something subtle has already begun to happen. You've seen the observer slip, shift, relocate, dissolve, almost like a mirage you can't quite drink from. And as you keep looking, the whole structure starts to wobble, kind of like staring at your own reflection in water. At first it looks solid, familiar, almost dependable. But the moment the surface ripples, even slightly, the face you believed was you bends, stretches, breaks apart. That's the moment you realize the witness inside you behaves the same way it looks steady, but only as long as you don't examine it too closely. The moment you do, the stability shatters. You've probably felt this wobble before, without realizing what it truly meant. One moment, the observer feels spacious and calm, as if it's some elevated presence quietly witnessing everything. The next moment it shrinks into a tense little knot in the chest. Then, without warning, it shifts behind the eyes, or hovers like a cloud somewhere above the body. And if the observer were truly your core, your center, your anchor, it wouldn't keep changing its address. Real centers don't wander. What wanders is your attention, and the observer simply follows it around, pretending to be the one in control. This is where deep sleep enters the conversation, and it matters more than you'd think. People often say, "Awareness can't be constant if it completely disappears when I sleep." But sit with that for a second. Do you actually remember disappearing? Or do you just remember waking up? What you recall is the absence of sensory and mental activity, not the absence of you. Sleep is like being in a dark room where nothing is happening. You don't vanish just because nothing is showing up to be noticed. Awareness doesn't need a movie to be running in order to exist. It's there before the dream, during the dreamless dark, and after. Which means the observer, the one that comes and goes depending on content, isn't the real awareness at all. It's just a temporary identity that appears when the mind lights up again. And this realization cracks something important wide open. The witness you've been relying on is not fundamental. It's a reflection, just like the moon on water, beautiful, helpful, even calming at times, but dependent on the surface of the mind being still enough to mirror it. No mind, no witness. That alone tells you the witness isn't who you really are, because what you are doesn't vanish when you sleep. What you are doesn't depend on mental clarity or emotional calmness. What you are is the awareness that holds all things, including the rise and fall of the observer itself. And when you finally see that the witness collapses the moment you try to grasp it, the illusion begins to lose its last place to hide. Once the so-called witness starts cracking apart, something fascinating begins to unfold. You try to hold on to whatever feels like you, but every time you reach for it, the ground shifts again. You sit quietly and search for that inner center. Maybe it feels like a pulse behind the eyes, a glow in the chest, or a soft presence floating somewhere around you. And for a moment, it seems like you've finally found the one spot that feels undeniably like, I am here. But then you realize something subtle. In order to say, the center feels like it's in the chest, you had to observe that center, which means the one who saw it was already standing somewhere else. So you turn your attention toward the place that felt like the true observer, and immediately it becomes another thing you're watching. Another object appearing in awareness. It's almost like trying to find the end of a hallway lined with mirrors. Every time you think you've reached the last one, another reflection stretches out behind it. You keep stepping back, and each step reveals that the you believed in merely turned into the latest thing being perceived. Body, perceived, mind, perceived, even subtle presence, perceived. The observer you swore was original turns out to be just another layer. The deeper you look, the more you notice a kind of pattern, one that feels both frustrating and strangely beautiful. The sense of me behaves like a traveler constantly changing seats. It hops from location to location inside your inner space. First a point, then a cloud, then a spacious feeling, then nothing you can point to at all. And the moment you try to lock it down, it evaporates into another appearance. The mind keeps offering new versions of yourself, each one more delicate than the last, each one claiming, this is the real observer, and each one disappearing the second you examine it closely. What you're left with isn't a clearer location, it's the realization that anything with a location can't be you. Eventually, something clicks. You're no longer just noticing the observer shift, you're noticing that the entire search itself has been happening inside something far more open than any version of me. Awareness isn't shrinking backward, it isn't hiding behind a final door, it isn't waiting for you to catch it, it's simply here, everywhere, boundless, uncontained. The backward step you've been taking over and over isn't leading to a more refined observer. It's revealing that there was never a solid observer in the first place, just layers of appearances rising and falling inside an awareness that has no center to find. As those backward steps dissolve into something vast and centerless, a quiet truth begins to form, not as a thought, but more like a recognition that was always waiting for you. When every version of the observer slips through your fingers, you're left with something you can't reduce to a point anymore. And that's when it becomes clear that watching doesn't mean there's a watcher. Seeing doesn't require a seer. Awareness doesn't need a small self sitting in some hidden room behind your eyes. The whole idea of an inner someone, an internal witness perched behind experience, starts to feel like a childhood story the mind keeps trying to retell long after you've outgrown it. You might notice a strange kind of relief here, because for so long, there's been a quiet pressure to hold everything together, to keep an eye on your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, your stories. But when the illusion of an internal observer drops, that weight suddenly disappears. There's no one left inside trying to track, control, manage, or interpret every moment of your life. Awareness is simply happening, effortlessly, the way sunlight lights a room without thinking about where to shine. No operator, no inner manager, just the natural movement of consciousness expressing itself without needing a center to belong to. And this is where the whole thing flips on its head. Instead of being someone behind the experience, you start to sense that you are the space in which experience appears. You're not the one watching the thoughts. You're the openness they rise and fall in. You're not behind the feelings. You're the field that allows them to pass through. You're not above your life. You're the very aliveness itself, without a boundary, without a location. It's like realizing the sky has been trying to identify as a small cloud this whole time. The cloud comes and goes, but the sky never had a beginning or an edge to define itself by. When the mind tries one last time to grab onto an identity, maybe as pure awareness, maybe as the witness of the witness, you notice that even those subtle versions can be observed, and the moment they're observed, they dissolve back into that same boundless clarity. There's no someone left to find, because there never was one. What remains isn't personal, it isn't separate, it isn't an object. It's the simple, luminous fact of knowing, centerless, ownerless, infinite. And the beautiful thing is, it's been here the whole time, quietly holding every moment of your life without ever needing to call itself you.